Signor Presidente del Consiglio, President Hamilton, Provost Fleming, Ambassador Varricchio, members of the delegation of the Prime Minister Gentiloni, students and faculty of New York University, dear friends and members of the press, welcome to Casa Italiana Zerilli-Marimò. And to all those of you who are following the live streaming either from the website of the Presidenza del Consiglio or from our own. This is an historical day for our institution and our community. After your predecessor, Giulio Andreotti, presided over the inauguration of the Casa in 1990, you are the first sitting Italian Prime Minister to come visit us. And for this, we are very and truly grateful. For the past 27 years, this brownstone in New York City's Greenwich Village, born from the vision, generosity, and hard work of Mariuccia Zerilli-Marimò, has opened its doors daily, not only to the students and faculty of Italian Studies at NYU, today the major department of Italian in the United States, but to thousands of people that share the love for Italian culture and have a strong and ever-growing interest for the extraordinary contributions of Italy to literature, music, the visual arts, science, and economy. Our mission of cultural diplomacy is carried out in daily and friendly collaboration with the diplomatic institutions that represent Italy here. And I thank Ambassador Varricchio because he was instrumental in getting President Gentiloni here with us tonight. But it originates from the heart of an American institution, New York University, that is the largest private university in the US. Your talk here today will give us a key to better understand the struggles and the hopes of Italy in the complex world of today. And after having briefly told you and the members of your delegation who we are and what we do, dear Prime Minister, I now have the honor to briefly introduce you to our audience. Paolo Gentiloni is a professional journalist and one of the founders of the Italian Democratic Party. He was first known to the national public when, as commissioner for the 2000 Jubilee for the City of Rome, he successfully oversaw all the aspects of an event that attracted millions of visitors to the Eternal City. Before being appointed Prime Minister, he served as Minister of Foreign Affairs in Matteo Renzi's cabinet. This is the official bio. Allow me a very short unofficial addendum. He's a very unusual politician. He has good manners, doesn't like the spotlight, avoids all sorts of polemics, treats the opponents with respect, doesn't scream, doesn't want to please everybody at all costs, or as the BBC put it in a much more elegant way than I did, he's quiet, organized, and unflashy, and speaks impeccably aristocratic English. And apparently, the Italians are starting to value these virtues, since in a recent poll, despite the political differences and fragmentation of the Italian political scene, Mr. Gentiloni was by far the most trusted politician with a record 49% approval rate. But before I invite him to the podium, I'd ask you to write, while the Prime Minister will deliver his remarks, your question, the question that you might have, on the cards that should be passing around, and then I'll collect them and I'll present them to him during the Q&A that will follow his remarks. And I'm now asking you to please welcome very warmly the Prime Minister of the Italian Republic, the Honorable Paolo Gentiloni.
Grazie. Thank you very much. I'm really impressed by your presentation and by the fact that I'm the first Italian Prime Minister, sitting Prime Minister after Giulio Andreotti to be here. Well, in a few minutes, I'll try to give you some views about Italy in the world. It is not easy, but then maybe we'll have some Q&A, and this will help us to go further in details. Well, we are in a very difficult and I think unpredictable world now. Geopolitical instability is there, and at the same time we have a economic dynamism, and in Europe a renewed sentiment of trust for our common journey, which is feeding hopes that we are heading towards better times. So on one side we have instability, the world unpredictable. On the other side we have a good economic perspective, even in Europe, that perhaps was a little bit slower to reach growth. Our societies have undergone 10 very difficult years. Choices such as Brexit, together with the emergence of nihilism in the form of organized populism, are all part of the complex net of consequences of that crisis, which trickled onto a crisis of trust and confidence. We are still fighting challenges on many fronts. We face a geopolitical scenario in which reasons of concerns are not decreasing. We could mention North Korea and the international terrorist threat, for example. We Italians are particularly focused on North Africa and the Middle East, with the view of finding a reasonable and equitable way to build a long-term and long-lasting stabilization. We want to see Africa thrive socially and economically. Also because this is the only way to manage migration flows without giving up to our principles and our humanity. While engaged in challenging geopolitical fronts, we are also experiencing, finally, a good outlook in our economies. In the current year, economic forecasts for Italy have been constantly amended with increasing numbers, reaching now an expected 1.5 growth for 2017. In Italy, female employment levels and foreign investment levels are at historical high. The first one is still very low, but it is at an historical high. Exports are rising fast by 8.2 compared to last year. Since 2014, our economy created more than 900,000 new jobs, and more people move from being discouraged and inactive to seeking employment. Italy spent the last 4 years in a quite extraordinary, for us, reform effort. We changed our labor market laws with a large discussion and controversial discussion. We reformed our banking systems to improve competitiveness and transparency. We prevented a few contained but potentially harming banking crises. We updated the justice system and our bureaucratic apparatus. We invested in public school and apprenticeship. We have to be cautious and will not lose momentum in these reforming efforts because they are relevant, but they are not complete. Ladies and gentlemen, a recent study published by the Brookings Institution stated that 3.2 billion people, that is 42% of the world population, lives currently in a middle-class condition. This is an extraordinary number. This number also gives long-term perspective to us. Italian companies produce goods that the global middle class wants generally to buy. Our country is a destination that the global middle class dreams frequently of. Unexpected intrusions of beauty. This is what life is. I stole this quote from Herzog by Solbello. I think it captures very well the source for the continuing power of attraction Italy has. This summer, our museum, our cities, our beaches increased visitors by the double digit. Italian entrepreneurs are able to keep our country stable as the second largest manufacturing economy in Europe and the fifth globally in manufacturing trade surplus. In other words, global trends suggest that the good economic performance we are experiencing relies on long-term trends, hopefully. But global trends also highlight a paradox we must face if we are to persist and to prevail in our effort of defending democracy against the external threat of terrorism and the internal threat of nihilism and populism. In fact, while the world looks in its best shape ever from a distant perspective, nobody lives in a distant perspective. People live in real context. People are not numbers or statistics. We know that in our developed countries, the middle class and the low earner groups, most often our youngest and brightest, have suffered and are still suffering. It is a fact that you will not rejoice for the improving social conditions in the other side of the planet. If your opportunities are shrinking, your salary does not allow you to make ends meet, if your kids look less fulfilled than you were at their age. And to make things harder, masters of illusion are at work, making sure that the legitimate causes for anger and frustration are exploited to the bone. And so progressive parties and governments are facing really hard challenges. There is no silver bullet. However, with the creative wisdom of politics, we can ensure that policies which support growth go hand in hand with those that support social inclusion. The efforts of my government have two key drivers. On the one hand, we will continue to work to improve our domestic conditions. In a few weeks, I will present to the Parliament the last budget law for this legislature. The other inspiring point of reference for us is Europe. Brexit worked indeed as a wake-up call. There is no doubt that the long-term assessment of the European project is one of stunning success. It has allowed for unprecedented economic progress and inclusive welfare across European countries. Our union has established peace in lands where war was the norm. But politics, again, is about the future. Decisions are taken on the new paths, not the old ones. This is why we need stronger economic policies, not to increase spending, but to give meaningful answers to our citizens. Europe needs to gain a more complete understanding of the damage that occurs when austerity is the only compass. And I am confident that we are nearly there. And we need, of course, a common European policy on migration. Ladies and gentlemen, we have also to re-establish the links between the past, the present, and the future. The masters of illusion always refer to the distant past, a golden age which never existed. As Mark Lilla said in his recent powerful book, the reactionaries of our time has discovered that nostalgia can be a powerful political motivator, perhaps even more powerful than hope. Hopes can be disappointed. Nostalgia is irrefutable. End of quotes. This is why it remains paramount to remember where we all really come from. In the last 70 years, Italy has been remarkably stable in its fundamentals, which means that we changed a lot of governments, but we were stable in our fundamentals. We reconstructed the country after the war, experienced the greatest economic boom in our history. We defeated internal terrorism. We built a modern and dynamic economy, nurtured generations of scholars, intellectuals, artists. Italy took the choice of Europe and the single currency, and more recently we were able to recover from the Great Recession, while always fulfilling international duties, including the global effort to tackle climate change. In all these years, we attempted at squaring the circle of economic freedom with an inclusive society. Looking at the past makes us confident that persisting is a good strategy, that confidence in democracy is well placed, that our values, while built out of a meaningful tradition, are the drivers for our choices. As President Lyndon Johnson put it, if we succeed, it will not be because of what we have, but it will be because of what we are, not because of what we own, but rather because of what we believe. Thank you for your attention.
The BBC and I forgot to mention that he has a great gift of synthesis, because in like 15 minutes you basically covered everything that was to be covered. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. Now I would like to invite to present her remarks and welcome to New York University the Provost of New York University, Katherine Fleming. Please welcome her.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I'm here and would like to say on behalf of President Hamilton and myself, we are genuinely, deeply honored by your presence. Thank you to the Italian Prime Minister, Paolo Gentiloni, for visiting New York University, and especially for visiting Casa Italiana, Zerilli-Marimò. I also wish to welcome and thank the Ambassador of Italy to the United States, Armando Varicchio, and his staff for making this visit possible. I am sure it took a lot of work and no small amount of anxiety. The Prime Minister has just reminded us of the very central role that Italy has long played and continues to play on an international platform. And the centrality of Italy in the world is very well reflected in the central role of Italian studies and the study of Italy from divergent aspects, art, music, law, fashion, and it holds this great centrality in New York University's global vision. And those of us who live in the neighborhood know that Italy marks our streets and parks. Very near to us, we have a beautiful statue of Garibaldi. The importance of Italy to the university is very much underscored by the building in which we're all gathered today, Casa Italiana, and also by Villa La Pietra in Florence. Both of these two were established in the early 1990s, thanks to the great generosity of two very different individuals who shared a common love of Italy, and both of whom really deserve to be recognized today. Sir Harold Acton, who gave us Villa La Pietra, and the Baroness Mariuccia Zerilli-Marimò, who gave us the building in which we find ourselves today, and who was a splendid, lovely woman with, I have to say, a wonderful sense of humor. Thanks to their great generosity and their vision, Italian culture is a very important aspect in the lives of thousands of people who come through the doorways of these two institutions. Now, as you've just heard, the Prime Minister, we are told, at least by Google, is a man of mystery. That is literally a common headline. The Economist referred to him as a, quote, gentleman minister, and the BBC asked the question, and I quote, Italy's quiet man, PM. Who is Paolo Gentiloni? Well, we're in the United States, and I have to say, I'm quite envious. It must be lovely, you Italians, to have a quiet gentleman. To have a quiet gentleman as your leader of state. Very well done. Now, we're going to continue the program, as you heard, with a Q&A, which is going to be moderated for us by Stefano Albertini. I've been asked to pose the first question, and I would like then to ask a colleague of mine, Professor Forgach, to pose the second question. So, if I may, you referred to a very, very potent and irrefutable sentiment, that of nostalgia. If I may dare, in Casa Italiana, to quote a Greek poet, George Seferis, in a very famous poem. He wrote, "Your nostalgia has created a non-existent country." And this is indeed exactly what nostalgia does, and what makes it so irrefutable is that it conjures into existence something that is an incontrovertible truth for the person who feels it, but that probably never existed. But the other side of nostalgia is longing. And I think longing is vividly represented in the immigration and refugee crisis that we now have in Europe. You have referred quite rightly to the need for a common European policy on this, but I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts on how to have a common policy regarding something that so disproportionately affects one part of Europe, namely its southern flank. That's my first question, and thank you again so much for being here. Stefano, why don't you join us for the Q&A?
Thank you very much for your words and for your question. About nostalgia, obviously, I think I totally agree with the quote I mentioned from Mark Lilla. There is a horrible use of nostalgia in present politics. Nothing to do, from my point of view, from the idea that we have a tradition, that we have stories, that we have what we call genius loci in our countries, in our region, in our cities, because this is a totally different story, and it is something that we are proud of in Italy, to have this link between our local tradition, local story, local characteristic, and the capacity to be in the world stage with our industries and with our culture. So I just wanted to make clear the distinction between the political use of nostalgia, describing a strange world that never happened, and asking you to separate yourself from the world, from the different people, from the globalization, from the future. And this is very dangerous. And on the other side, there is a positive aspect of our roots, with our past, with our story, with our tradition that we have to, I think, respect and even strengthen. On migration, the discussion is very long and complicated. I think that we need mostly two things, many others, but mostly two things. One is the awareness in the Mediterranean and in Europe that the phenomenon will be a very long one. I remember discussing this with, and I'm happy to mention him this evening, also to give him solidarity for what happened this afternoon. I remember to discuss this with Enrique Peña Nieto, the Mexican president, and he remembered me that the flows in the southern border of US stabilized in about 30 years. And now, this is his point, the number of Mexicans that are going towards US and the number of Mexicans that are leaving US to Mexico is more or less flat. And there is a balance, but after 20 or 30 years. So Europe has to know that Africa is there, that Nigeria in 30 years will have a larger population than EU, Nigeria only, and that this phenomenon cannot be stopped, eliminated, eradicated. It is totally impossible. And the second thing we need is to understand that we have the only answer that we can give is to try to manage this phenomenon, avoiding to smugglers to manage it, and managing it from our side, reducing the risk and strengthening the advantages of migration, because we have several advantages of migration that we can use. But this can be done only if we work together as Europe. If we think that only one or two countries, normally it's Italy and Greece, but who knows, the geography and history could change rapidly. Only a couple of countries are able to manage this. It is totally unrealistic. So we have to develop an enormous amount of efforts towards Africa and towards the wars and the crises that are going on, and we have to do this in a stable manner, because the migration flows will stay, not finishing tomorrow, and we have to do this together. Only these 2 points will help the solution very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. There were other questions on the issue of immigration, but I think you covered those. And now we'd like to ask Professor David Forgash to ask his question. He's the chair of the Department of Italian Studies here and an historian of contemporary Italy.
Well, I'd like to repeat what Katherine Fleming said. It's very encouraging to have a Prime Minister who is respected as calm and gentlemanly and not demagogic.
What kind of Prime Minister, you know?
And I think I just want to ask perhaps a more difficult question. You ended your speech by saying that the aim of your government and your vision for the future is to reconcile economic freedom with an inclusive society. And that's an admirable vision. We know it has a cost. But I wanted just to ask you what you think about the possibility that Italy might relapse into something more unstable. It hasn't yet had its Brexit. It hasn't yet had Donald Trump. It did have, of course, from 1994 to 2011, a Prime Minister for much of the time who was critical of kind of conventional government and so on. And there are certainly figures in the wings who could threaten the stability of the parliamentary system and the political system. I think we know who we're talking about. We're talking about the Movimento 5 Stelle, the Five-Star Movement, which came as a very large party in the 2013 election. So there are forces that we know in Italy which don't want the kind of stability that you're looking for. How is it possible, or is it possible in some ways, to guarantee a stable future in a country which hasn't had a particularly stable past in relation to respect for political institutions, and where there are still forces at large that might threaten that project?
I think that you are right, but at the same time, I strongly believe that we have to to better distinguish the stability, the global stability of a country, Italy in this case, and the stability or instability of their governments. So it is true that Italy had frequently in the last 70 years a turnover of governments very frequent. I'm always impressed when I meet the German Chancellor that she has out of her office the portraits of her predecessors, and they are 7. We have at the 3rd floor of the building of the government the portraits of the Italian prime ministers in the same period after the war, and they are a little bit more than 7. So it is true that we have a frequent turnover of governments, but it is also true that we have a profound stability of our values and our system. We have a constitution that is working since 70 years, and we can discuss some parts of it, but the fundamental principles are there and stable. We are a pro-European country, and we have had this position always in the last 60 years after the Treaty of Rome of the European Community. We are NATO members since the beginning, almost the beginning. We are free market, pro-export, with stable economic philosophy in our country. Small and medium enterprises, pro-export orientation. So what I want to say is that, yes, we can have different governments. I think that we don't have a chance of real anti-establishment, anti-Europe positions winning the government in my country. I'm not convinced that this is really possible. But in any case, we can have changements, but changements will not afford the profound stability of this country. So I am rather optimistic because the problems we faced in the last years were very, very serious and challenging. Migration, we are talking about, and we are trying to manage the problem, to reduce the flows, to organize them better. I don't know if we will be able to do this in a stable way, but we are trying, and it is working. We had a profound recession for many, many years, and we are out of this, even if with many problems in front of us. We had apparently very dangerous banking situation, apparently because you never know if it is the rules that create the problem or the problems that breaks the rules. But in any case, we had serious difficulties with relevant Italian banks, and we fixed these difficulties. So what I want to say is that a country with an extraordinary potential towards the world has now a economic and political profound stability. This doesn't mean that we will have the same government for the next 10 years. It never happened, and it will never happen. Never, I don't know. It will not happen soon.
Mr. Prime Minister, as we can expect, being in a university, a couple of questions concern the problem of the so-called brain drain. That is an expression that I hate, but it exists. And one of the questions goes, we have lost a lot of young brains. Do you think Italy still has any potential to attract them back? And is your government currently working on any type of measure to do so? And connected to this, another question, what would you say to an Italian abroad who just graduated at NYU? Why should he or she come back to Italy?
Well, in general, because I've read a ranking. I think it was published by Bloomberg, if I'm not wrong, a few weeks ago. I'm not seeing my friend Filippo, but perhaps it was Bloomberg. Yes. It was a ranking of, a global ranking of all the countries of the world. And the result was that the country with, where you can live longer and with the highest quality of life was Italy. Is this a good reason to... It's not bad. Yes, from my point of view, it's relevant.
It could be, but there is a problem in attracting researchers.
No, I was answering to the second question.
Why come back to Italy?
Come back to Italy. This is
we have the beach and the sun. Yeah,
this is a good driver. No, you live longer
Absolutely.
and better. What kind of
especially in some microclimates.
What kind of better expectation you can have in your life that to live longer and better? But apart from this, that is a joke, but not totally a joke, because it is a real something that was really published, and I think with some scientific basis. But on the other side, yes, there is a large circulation of students and talents, and we have to improve our politics, I think, in two directions. One, for sure, to create opportunities for those that are abroad to come back, and we are trying to do this. It is not easy because we have many investment to do in our scientific and university system. We began, but we have a lot of work to do. The second direction I would work on, and we are trying to work on, is to have a stronger attraction in our universities for foreign students. Because my problem as Prime Minister is not only the fact that there are Italian students going abroad, because this is absolutely normal. What should be also normal is the fact, the opportunity for those who want to come back and have opportunities coming back. This is the point, not the fact that they are studying abroad, which is normal. And also, I would like very much to have a larger number of foreign students in our university. We have excellent universities. I have to say we have also larger number of foreign students that is normally thought in our debate. For example, I don't know how many of you knows how many foreign students are studying in Milan University in this moment, and they are quite a lot. Then we have discussions when Politecnico di Milano decided to have
English-only degrees.
English-only degrees in some subjects. There was a huge discussion in the country, and I understand this. But in any case, we have to work in both directions to multiply the opportunity for those that are willing to come back and to attract. I would like very much the attraction of students in Italy coming from several Mediterranean countries. This would be, for me, extraordinarily important. I'm not saying that we don't want German students. We want German students, but the Arab world, the African countries, the Balkan countries, we have already many of them studying in Italy, many of them, especially in the Balkan and in the southern part of Europe, but we could have many more of them from Africa, the Middle East, and this, I think, would be a great success for our universities.
But Mr. Prime Minister, so where is the problem? Because we agree that many Italian universities are excellent and they provide great level of education, and still they're not attractive enough to attract either back Italians who are abroad or, as you said, scholars and students from other countries. So there is something there that is difficult to pinpoint, but...
You use the term enough, and I agree, because I wouldn't say that they are not attracting. They are not attracting enough. Mm-hmm. Because I repeat, the numbers of foreign students is increasing and is high, particularly in some specific cities in Italy. Milan, Florence, some cities.
Turin too, I think, the Polytechnic.
Yes, but I mean thousands and thousands of foreign students, not a few small numbers. So I think we have to multiply these efforts, but we are more or less in the right track, and you know, many things goes together. One is also the organization of labor, the organization of housing. There are many aspects. If you pay attention of how a city like London functions for housing and jobs, well, I don't know if it is right or wrong, but it is very, very flexible. And this is not exactly the case frequently in our country.
Yeah. I have a question now. It's a bit more on the light side because we all face very, very serious topic, and it's a typical question from a New Yorker. And it says, Uber, Via, and so on, when are you going to have them in Italy? Why are you so late in allowing these companies? They work well, they create jobs. Uber e tutte queste robe qua. Quando arrivano? Arrivano.
Uber is there. There is a certain amount of tension since a few years because Uber is there. The tension is obviously with the established groups, in this case of taxi drivers. Frequently these established groups have a political influence in local administration. They have also political supporters. So the liberalization is always a difficult story. And what is strange in my country is that in the traditional division between right and left, or center right and center left, you could believe that it is the center right pro-liberalization and the center left against liberalization. Normally it has been the contrary in our country. But in any case, Uber is there, and whatever, all the big web platform are there, and we are discussing how to tax them. So
Just to welcome
not
them
only
to
Italy, all over Europe.
Then we have a couple of questions regarding today's speech of President Trump at the National Assembly of the UN. I don't know whether you feel like commenting upon them, but there were at least 3 questions about that. How do you feel about the strong language that President Trump used this morning, especially against Korea and the threat of war?
Well, I am not. I think that the president, the speech of the president was, in some way, stressing concepts that he already gave in this, in these months. I was impressed by 2 things. One is that apparently the president's attitude towards UN was less confrontational than it was supposed to. And my impression was that my friend Gutierrez was very happy yesterday during the meeting they had before the beginning of the General Assembly. The second point is that, well, we have to find a balance between the concept of taking into account and stressing your national interest and the situation of the world. We are not yet there. And this is not, I have to say to our American friends, this is not a problem of the Donald Trump language. It is a problem all over the world. We have a tendency to stress national interest first in several countries. This is one of the consequences of what we were talking about, so the contradictions of globalization. So you look to globalization and you think that the openness of your economy, the trade, and so on, created damages to your citizens, to your country, and that refusing this and stressing your national interest before this is the right solution to the problem. But obviously, if this is a tendency that every single country begins to share, what kind of world we are going to. So personally, Italy is still convinced of the fact that multilateralism is the real, I wouldn't say solution, it is the real way to tackle with our global problems. I am not convinced that the idea that the single country is dealing with their problem, and so this is the way of thinking of a lot of sovereign countries. I don't think that this is a real solution. So there is an interesting quote, I hope to remember it more or less well, from Michael Walzer. He was saying that we live in a world where post-sovereignty and hyper-sovereignty are living together. Because we have post-sovereignty. we have a lot of mechanisms that are completely outside sovereignty, from climate change to terrorism, from finance to many others. And so you have post-sovereignty. But on the other side, at least in the last 4 or 5 years, we have a tendency to hyper-sovereignty. I am not sure that hyper-sovereignty is a solution. So I totally respect the idea of the president to defend the national interest of US. I understand the reason, politically, I understand the reason why he is saying this. But I think that we have to connect this to the multilateral approach that we need. North Korea, how can we solve the North Korea issue without a multilateral approach? We need several players to solve this problem. So I think that President Trump gave a clear vision. The clear vision is the vision of what he said in the last months. I think that there is something very useful about United Nations, but I am still convinced of the principles we are fighting for as Italians, and I hope also as Europeans. And this is open trade, multilateralism, no to protectionism, the agreement on climate change. So we have some results at international level, and I think we have to defend these results. This will not afford our relation with the United States, because I was saying before that we are a very stable country. The very stable country had very good relation with Kennedy, with Nixon, with Clinton, with Bush, and we have good relation with US since 70 years. So this is not a problem of bilateral relation, it's a problem of the view that we have of the world. And I am completely convinced that we still need a view where multilateralism, open market, freedom, fight against climate change are the basic principles of our common activity. And we will discuss among friends around these principles, as we discussed in the G7 that we had in Italy, in Taormina. It was a very positive discussion with very good compromises at the end. And this is diplomacy.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I was looking for a question that would allow us to close on a positive note, because after the question on President Trump's statement this morning at the UN, I was very pessimistic, but I think you managed somehow to close your statement and therefore our evening, because I know you're headed to another appointment, with these key words, amongst which multilateralism and the impossibility of solving the problems alone, either as individuals or as states. And we take this as a wish and as a hope that you express also on our behalf tomorrow morning when you speak at the General Assembly of the UN. And with this,
Grazie.
grazie a lei.
Thank you very much. Grazie.